The hero of this story is a fragile student who is constantly the target of bullying at his school. At home, his situation is no different. Even his own family despises him. Life has not been easy for him at all. But when he is forced to enter a virtual reality game, he discovers a world even more cruel than reality itself. Inside this game, death is not just a simple game over. It also carries heavy consequences in the real world. It is in this brutal setting that our hero decides to become stronger, seeking revenge against everyone. Right at the beginning of the anime, we see him participating in a career guidance session with his teacher. This is not the first time he has done this. And as always, Hiroshi still had not chosen a path for his future. The teacher suggested that he consider returning to the track and field club. From the teacher's words, it becomes clear that something in the past happened that led Hiroshi to abandon the sport. Since then, he has never trained again, nor even thought about returning to practice. The teacher showed understanding, but tried to cheer him up with motivational phrases that in practice had nothing to do with Hiroshi's real problem. Looking at the teacher's desk, Hiroshi noticed that he had been reading a book about how to make friends and influence people. That was why the teacher was using those words from the book. And so the conversation ended without major results. On his way back home, Hiroshi's eyes fell on the schoolyard, where some students were practicing athletics. A boy with orange hair recognized him and ran toward him. They knew each other, and just like the teacher, the friend insisted that Hiroshi return to the club and train, but as always, he refused. The friend, unable to force him, simply said goodbye. To escape this past that haunts him so much, Hiroshi began spending his time playing virtual reality games. And today was a special day for him because the release of Final Quest Party 22, a title he had been eagerly awaiting, had just arrived, a clear reference to Final Fantasy, which is itself soon reaching its 22nd installment. He walked quickly toward the game store, but along the way he was surprised by two street delinquents. As always, his apathetic expression seemed to invite everyone to bully him. The two demanded money as a protection fee, and Hiroshi had no choice but to pay. After taking all the money, they even said that if he wanted to see someone getting beaten up, he just had to look for them. And Hiroshi thought to himself, I am paying these two guys only so that I don't get beaten up. After getting rid of them, he continued on his way to the game store. But upon reaching the cashier, he discovered he had less money than needed. He remembered his earlier encounter and realized he had mistakenly handed over 10,000 yen instead of just 1,000 yen to the thugs. Disappointed and unable to buy Final Quest 22, Hiroshi left the store dejected, wandering completely without direction. His steps led him to a small, old shop called Kisaragi. Without much expectation, he decided to enter, and the store's interior confirmed his suspicions. The games available were all at least 3 years old. Hiroshi approached the shop clerk, a younger girl with long white hair, strikingly beautiful for a young boy to behold. Her name was Riona Kisaragi. He then asked her if that store carried the long-awaited Final Quest Part 22. It was at that moment that Riona burst out laughing. She said that this franchise had already been stretched far too much, reaching 22 sequels without ever finishing the story. She complained that the developers should at least change the title to fool new players, but Hiroshi only wanted to know if she had the game. Instead of answering, Riona began criticizing the game, saying that initially it had been fun, but over time Final Quest became monotonous. Nothing more than an endless and emotionless item hunt. Her words struck Hiroshi deeply because he knew she was right. Even so, he was not there to be scolded by an attractive shop clerk. He only wanted his game. When he was already preparing to leave, Riona interrupted him, saying that as a way of apologizing for insulting the game he wanted to play, she had decided to offer him a great discount, selling him the game for only 10,000 yen. Excited, Hiroshi accepted immediately, but after paying, he realized he had been deceived. The game he received was not Final Quest 22. To make matters worse, Riona had already placed the money in the register and refused to return it. She insisted that this game was much better than the sequel he so desired, and its name was simply Kiwami Quest, an RPG so realistic that it made reality itself look like a walk in the park. According to the explanation given by the shop owner, that particular game was a full immersion RPG that pushed realism to an extreme level, but Hiroshi did not care about that. All he wanted was his money back. To make matters worse, she said the game was intended only for adults, which made Hiroshi feel even less capable of enjoying it. Even so, the woman began provoking him, trying to convince him to abandon childish little games and step onto this darker path. Holding Hiroshi's hand, She finally introduced herself and revealed that she also played Kiwami Quest. She promised to teach him everything he needed to know about the game, and thanks to her generous and prominent heart, which she made sure to display and sway, Hiroshi eventually gave in and bought the game. He even received her phone number and went back home excited. But his enthusiasm quickly faded when he discovered that the game had been made 10 years earlier. Suspicious, he dialed the girl's number, only to hear an automated message saying that the number he had called was out of service. Furious, he considered throwing the game away, but gave up after all. He had already spent a good amount of money. When he arrived home, it was already nighttime. Before playing, he decided to take a shower, but when he opened the bathroom door, he ran straight into his younger sister Keed, who luckily was wearing at least some clothes. Blushing with embarrassment, he apologized and rushed back to his room. Determined, he decided to test the game right away. He inserted the disc into the console, sat down in the chair, and began the full dive session. As soon as he entered the virtual world, the system presented the main objective: defeat the Demon King and save the world. His primary mission was simple: leave the main city and head to the place where he would receive new instructions. However, Hiroshi did not start as a hero or a knight, but instead as a simple villager. The setting was astonishing. The landscapes looked real. The sense of touch was identical to real life. Even pain existed. Still surprised, Hiroshi was approached by an NPC, and with the quality of the modeling, he could hardly believe this was from a game 10 years old. For a moment, he even thought he had actually been transported to another world. The girl introduced herself as Alicia, Hiroshi's childhood friend within the game. She invited him to pick apples that day. Soon after, Martin, Alicia's older brother, appeared. He called Hiroshi over for breakfast, and while they talked, Alicia accidentally shut the door on Hiroshi's head, causing an injury that hurt quite a lot. To make up for it, Martin handed him an apple, saying that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. When he smelled the fruit and bit into it eagerly, Hiroshi was astonished, because it truly felt as though he were eating a real apple. Annoyed by his rough way of eating, Alicia cut the apple with a knife and offered it to him in small slices. Hiroshi then remembered his first mission and asked Martin and Alicia how he could reach the city of Flora. Immediately, the siblings became tense. Martin told him not to mention that place so recklessly, treating Hiroshi as if he were some kind of criminal. Alicia suggested that they go to the farm to talk about it in more detail, but Hiroshi thought they were exaggerating and decided to go on his own. At that moment, Martin grabbed him firmly, preventing him from leaving. It was then that Hiroshi discovered the truth. The city they lived in was a safe place, basically a starter area. The residents had dug enormous pits around the entire town to protect themselves from goblin attacks. No one could leave, and no one could enter, except for the special messengers. All external communication had been cut off, and even after hearing all of this, Hiroshi thought that goblins could not possibly be that big of a deal. On the contrary, he declared that he would defeat every single goblin. The siblings looked at him as if he were a hopeless case. Then Martin made a decision to show Hiroshi just how cruel that world truly was. Hiroshi already believed all of this was nothing more than a simple tutorial at the start of the game, so he took on a defensive stance, certain this was going to be only a harmless simulation. But before he could react, he took a punch directly to the face, delivered by Martin. The pain was real. Screaming, Hiroshi cursed in despair, but Martin did not stop. He continued striking him repeatedly until Hiroshi's nose began to bleed. Now Martin, chewing on an apple, began mocking him, saying that with such a weak body, he would not be able to defeat even a rabbit. Those words wounded Hiroshi more than the punches themselves. In real life, Hiroshi was already the victim of bullying. He sought refuge in games to escape from all that, and now, even inside an RPG, he was being humiliated and beaten. Overcome with rage, he shoved Martin to the ground. He was happy to have managed to knock Martin down, but fate turned out to be cruel. The fall caused the knife Martin was holding to fatally stab him. Martin began bleeding heavily, and right before Hiroshi's stunned eyes, Martin died instantly. Alice's scream echoed through the house, desperate over her brother's death. Immediately afterward, she turned on Hiroshi in fury, ignoring any explanation he tried to give. After all, whether it was an accident or not, the dead would not return to life. Terrified, Hiroshi fled, but his escape only fueled Alice's hatred, who pursued him like a maddened beast. For several days, he ran through the city, hiding in alleys, until he finally managed to shake her off, exhausted and in shock. Hiroshi tried to convince himself that everything was fine. After all, this was only a game, so all he had to do was log out and restart. That way, Martin would be alive again. It was at that moment that Riona appeared before him, unlike the shop clerk form. Now she was in the body of a small fairy, very beautiful, but far too tiny. She explained that her class was that of a guide character, created by the company and linked to partner stores, meaning that no one besides him could see or hear her. However, by the time she arrived, it was already too late, since the opening missions like gathering information or spending time with childhood friends had already been destroyed by the disaster Hiroshi had caused. Riona checked the mark on Hiroshi's neck, and engraved there was the title childhood friend killer. Horrified, she had to tell him that Hiroshi had chosen the darkest possible path, trying to defend himself. He insisted that everything had only been an accident, but Riona coldly countered, saying that every murderer says the same thing in court. Desperate, Hiroshi begged to restart the game. Riona, however, delivered devastating news. This game had no reset function, its system was hyper-realism. Every action was saved automatically, and even if he shut down the console, he would return to the exact point where he had stopped. If he wanted to get rid of that infamous mark, there was only one way: buy another console. But each unit cost around 900,000 yen, and of course, Riona offered him a special solution. She would sell him a console for 1,200,000 yen, her price being even higher than that of regular shops. Indignant, Hiroshi demanded a refund, but Riona refused without hesitation. The store had a clear disclaimer policy, and when he threatened to sue her, she simply laughed to her. A bullied high school student would never be able to pull that off. She then told him to accept reality and keep playing. After that, Riona went back to talking about the game, revealing that the true name of this title was not Kiwami Quest, but Ultimate Quest, a full immersion RPG released 10 years earlier with a limited number of copies sold in Japan. The game had quickly fallen into obscurity, being considered one of the cruelest and most unpopular games in history. Even so, a few players endured. Among them was one called Jindy, who was also known for having killed his childhood friend right at the beginning. He had done this 10 years ago at the game's launch, and so Riona suggested Hiroshi should seek him out. Before disappearing, Riona asked him to check his inventory, where he already had 30 gold coins. She advised him to buy new clothes as a disguise, since news of Martin's death had already spread, and Hiroshi was now officially a wanted man. Hiroshi entered a clothing store to try and disguise himself. He picked a shirt that cost 15 gold coins, but the merchant immediately recognized him. And being a clever trader, he did not report Hiroshi, yet he also did not miss the chance to exploit the situation. He gave Hiroshi a special price, saying he would have to pay 25 gold coins, and if he refused, who knows what might happen. Perhaps everyone would discover his location, and he would be executed in public. It was at that moment that Hiroshi truly felt on his own skin that this game reflected the worst parts of real life. Determined not to go through this endlessly, he resolved to search for that Jindy, the veteran who, according to Riona, had been living in a casino for 10 years. The city was immense, surrounded by walls and deep trenches, completely isolated from the outside world. No one dared disobey the rules there, because leaving without permission meant immediate death, a system of absolute fear. Riona explained that if Hiroshi truly wished to leave the city, he would absolutely need to find Jindy. Thus, they headed toward the entertainment district, where Jindy supposedly lived. But before finding him, Hiroshi ran straight into Alicia. Even in disguise, he could not fool her after all. She was his childhood friend, and NPCs like her are not mere programmed puppets. They have advanced artificial intelligence, being fully autonomous and perceptive like human beings. Nervous, Hiroshi insisted that he had not killed Martin on purpose, and to his surprise Alicia said she believed him, even apologizing for having lost her temper earlier. She revealed that she had thought a lot and had something to tell him. She began to say that she loved him more than anything. For a moment Hiroshi sighed in relief, thinking everything had finally been resolved. But Alicia's expression suddenly changed. She began to say that because of that love, she was going to kill him. That way, she, Martin, and Hiroshi could be reunited in the afterlife. With tears in her eyes and a disturbing smile, Alicia pulled out the same knife that had killed Martin and swore she would cut Hiroshi the same way she always peeled apples. At that moment, Riona warned him that Alicia was extremely strong, and most players chose her as their companion. Facing her head-on was the same as committing suicide. But since Alicia could not see Riona, she thought Hiroshi was praying, so she promised to help him by sending him faster to the other world. Faced with danger, Hiroshi did what he always did: he ran to save his own life. Following Riona's instructions, he zigzagged to try to escape. He ran into the forest and hid in a wooden cabin. Now completely exhausted, he realized that his fatigue was real, just like in life outside the game. To make matters worse, his title had changed again. Now he was called a murderous childhood friend and cowardly fugitive. Tired of everything, Hiroshi just wanted to pause the game and rest, since he needed to wake up early for school. But when he opened the menu, he realized it didn't work. Riona explained that he could not save progress while in battle. At that moment, Alicia caught up with him and slashed his arm deeply. On her second strike, Riona intervened with a punch to Alicia's eye, blinding her for a few seconds. Hiroshi took advantage of the opening and ran once more, but Alicia followed him, shouting that no matter how far he fled, she would always find him. Running without looking back, Hiroshi finally escaped the battle and managed to log out of the game. Now lying in his bed, he breathed heavily, watching his trembling hand, and wondered how long it had been since he had run like that. The next morning, he received a message from Riona, inviting him to play again after school. In class, Hiroshi told his experience. The two laughed, calling it a trash game. His friend Mori was not against him liking games, but he advised Hiroshi to face the people who belittled him in real life, because if he kept only playing and running away, everyone would continue to pick on him. Unfortunately, Hiroshi pretended not to care about all the bullying he suffered. Returning home exhausted, he lay down on his bed and reflected on his friend's words. Shortly after, he heard knocks on the door. It was his sister, Keed, complaining that he had shouted all night, waking up the whole family. She asked him to give up games and go back to running, but Hiroshi only gave a vague reply, telling her to go away or else he would poop in her bed. After that, he returned to the game, reappearing exactly where he had left off. He was running, his arm bleeding, and the wound needed treatment. He checked his inventory and found some herbs, but didn't know how to turn them into medicine. He tried crushing the leaves, poking them, doing anything, but all in vain. That was when a drunk man approached, and by the way he spoke about NPCs, Hiroshi realized he was another player. Finally, he was face to face with Jinji. Introducing himself quickly, Hiroshi begged for help. Jinji looked at him with contempt, sighed, and then muttered that newbies were always the same. Even so, he took the herbs and treated Hiroshi's wound. After healing our hero, Jinji took him to a casino where they could talk better. Sitting at the table, Jinji offered him a mug, telling Hiroshi to drink and feel good. Hiroshi refused, saying he was underage, but Jinji smiled and said it was just soda. Still suspicious, Hiroshi took a sip and realized it really was soda. But even so, the man seemed drunk on it, which made everything even stranger. Between sips and laughter, Hiroshi finally opened up, telling about the accident that resulted in Martin's death. Jinji burst into laughter, as if it were the funniest thing he had ever heard. When Hiroshi asked why Jinji had killed his own friend in the past, the answer came in a dry tone. Jinji said that it had been a thing of youth. The NPC had said some nonsense that irritated him, and so he simply killed him. After that, when his childhood friend began to complain, he killed her as well. Hiroshi was horrified. How could someone speak of murder so coldly? But Jinji explained that this game was different from anything else. The body you have here is the same as in real life. If you're not strong, fast, or clever, you don't stand a chance. In 10 years, only one person had managed to beat this game, a high school student unbelievably skilled, called Kamui. His title was the Peerless Adventurer. Jinji himself was known to all as an inhuman creature. Confused and seeking guidance, Hiroshi asked what he should do, and without any warning Jinji tore off Hiroshi's disguise hood and shouted to everyone that the childhood friend's killer was here. Immediately, guards appeared and surrounded the table. Desperate, Hiroshi tried to run, but Jinji grabbed him in a chokehold until he passed out. When he regained consciousness, he had already been captured. He discovered that Jinji had handed him over in exchange for money to drink. Still mocking him, Jinji told him that when he was interrogated, he must deny everything. If he confessed, he would end up in forced labor. Inside this game, Jinji had spent 13 years imprisoned and knew well how hard it was to endure forced labor. Dragged through the streets by soldiers, Hiroshi was displayed before the population. Stones rained down on him, accompanied by insults and laughter. Even the guards were struck by the stones and had to disperse the crowd. Humiliated, Hiroshi collapsed to the ground. He had never felt so degraded. At that moment, he remembered the goddess who had appeared at the beginning of the game, proclaiming that he was the chosen hero to save the world. After recalling this, he raised his head and declared to the guards that if they did not release him now, they would regret it, for he was the hero and one day they would need him to save this world. But the soldier escorting him was not impressed. On the contrary, he grew irritated. He had lost count of how many thieves and murderers had used that excuse, and Hiroshi was nothing more than one of them. Now he had to shut up, for the guard was already tired of working overtime without receiving a single extra cent. While being dragged, Hiroshi noticed Alicia's silhouette on a rooftop illuminated by the moon. One of her eyes was covered, and she still held the knife, peeling an apple. But instead of attacking, she recoiled in fear and vanished into the darkness. Fearing the possible encounter, Hiroshi begged to be thrown back into prison. The guards locked him in a cold stone cell, leaving him to await interrogation. Exhausted, he tried to pause the game, but could not. The story sequence was still unfolding. 30 minutes passed and nothing happened. He tried to log out several times until he lost his patience and began to shout, but hunger forced him to quiet down. Soon another need emerged, going to the bathroom. As he prepared to use the latrine, he was startled by the appearance of a blood-soaked ghost. It was Martin. Blood streamed from his slit throat as he cursed and reviled Hiroshi. The shock was so great that Hiroshi fell backward, nearly crushed by fear. Trembling, Hiroshi tried to defend himself, saying it was not his fault. He said that Martin had been holding that knife while cutting the apple. Martin paused for a moment to think, then admitted he bore some of the blame too. But soon he returned to reproach Hiroshi with rancor. He told him that even though he had part of the fault, it was Hiroshi who had broken the promise between them, and for that he would have to fulfill it. Until Hiroshi remembered the promise, Martin would continue to haunt him. Hiroshi was confused. He had no idea what promise the ghost spoke of. After all, to him, this childhood friend only existed inside the game. At the same time, Martin burst into a macabre laugh, still spitting blood, and told Hiroshi that he would remember sooner or later, and when he did, Martin would be right there by his side. The ghost of Martin clung to Hiroshi, spitting blood and lamenting that he had not lived longer. The disturbing sight left Hiroshi so terrified that he began to scream for help. After several calls, finally someone appeared, this time a red-haired girl. She was small for someone working in a prison. There was no doubt she was an employee there. She opened the cell and freed Hiroshi, leading him through a narrow corridor to a room where there was a bed and several metallic instruments. Along the way she lamented, saying her name was Mizuriza. Hiroshi still didn't understand what was happening, but soon the girl's wicked smile revealed the truth. Suddenly, before his eyes, a red warning screen appeared, asking if he was mentally prepared for intense stimulation. Blushing and nervous, Hiroshi believed it was one of those adult events Riona had mentioned earlier. He thought it would be something positive and began to reflect. Two forces clashed within him. One pure side wanted to ignore it, while the other urged him to take part in this intense stimulation. Before he could decide, Mizuriza shoved him onto the bed and ordered him to close his eyes. In the darkness, Hiroshi clearly heard the sound of clothes being taken off. His heart pounded. He believed he was about to experience a unique moment of pleasure, but soon after, he heard the rattle of chains and the scraping of blades. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was tied up, and before him stood Mizuriza, now wearing a dark leather outfit typical of someone who delights in torturing others. She then asked if he was being haunted, and without waiting for confirmation, declared she would beat him until the ghost went away. She explained that if he confessed to his crime, he would be executed. But if he endured the beating, the guilt would be placed upon demons, and he would be absolved. With a sadistic gleam in her eyes, she brought a saw close to his leg. The metal grazed his skin, leaving a shallow, bloody cut. The pain was real and unbearable, making Hiroshi scream in panic. The more he endured, the more the girl seemed to enjoy herself. Her eyes shone with excitement, as if his suffering was the greatest pleasure she could feel. At that moment, Riona finally appeared. She had been late because she was distracted watching a movie in the real world. Hiroshi begged her to free him, but the chains were too strong, and all she could do was encourage him to hold on. When the saw began cutting into his thigh, Hiroshi couldn't take it anymore. Desperate, he wet himself in fear, but that only heightened Mizuriza's excitement. She promised to cut even deeper. With no hope left, Hiroshi gave up resisting and surrendered to his fate. But just as the blade was about to descend for real, a guard entered the room and interrupted the session. Without further explanation, he simply announced that Captain Tesla had ordered the interrogation to end. The system updated his reputation once again. Now he carried the title of Childhood Friend Killer, Cowardly Fugitive, and the one who wets himself in fear. Riona celebrated, relieved that he had escaped death yet again. But Hiroshi, ashamed and exhausted, felt no relief. His pride had been destroyed along with what little dignity he had left. After the torture with Mizuriza, Hiroshi decided he would never play Kiwami Quest again. Upon logging out, he swore to himself that he would never touch that game again, and when he woke up, the first thing he did was check his own bed. Thankfully, it was dry. Breathing a sigh of relief, he reaffirmed his promise. He would never play that game again. A few days later, there was a district track and field competition. Though he had abandoned the sport long ago, Hiroshi decided to try running once more. To his surprise, many still remembered him. Back in elementary school, he had been considered a monster on the track, with a natural talent for short-distance sprints. His younger sister Keed was there to cheer him on, and soon after, his friend Mori also appeared. Trying to encourage him, Mori explained that Hiroshi's main rival this time would be a red-haired boy, equally talented. In addition, many scouts and competitors were present. Observing the event closely, it was, after all, the first tournament at the high school level. The pressure was enormous. Feeling nervous, Hiroshi decided to head to the bathroom to relax. But on the way, he encountered a foreigner. He recognized him immediately. It was Mike, a famous athlete known as the King of Second Place. After retiring, Mike had become a sports reporter. Mike said he was there because he had heard of Hiroshi's feats, as Hiroshi still held the district speed record. He believed that among so many competitors, Hiroshi had the greatest potential. Those words gave Hiroshi a surge of confidence. But so caught up in the conversation, he completely forgot to go to the bathroom. When the race began, before the starting gun, Hiroshi exchanged provocations with the red-haired boy. At the shot, Hiroshi had a poor start, running far too slowly. But soon he refocused, breathing deeply and accelerating. One by one, he overtook his opponents, until he was about to catch up to the redhead. Then he stumbled, fell to the ground, and lost the race. The shame didn't stop there. Unable to hold it in, he ended up wetting himself in front of everyone. The audience, the scouts, and his rivals all bore witness to his humiliation. Desperate, he ran to wash his pants, but he could not erase the humiliation. When he left the bathroom, Keed tried to console him, but Hiroshi, irritated, pushed her away with harsh words, making his own sister leave in tears. Soon after, Mike approached and was relentless, saying that his childhood had been terrible. Hiroshi tried to explain the accident, but that only worsened the impression. To Mike, the spirit of an athlete was more important than any result, and Hiroshi had failed in the essential. He had not been able to endure the pressure of a race. Beyond his problems with running, he had many others. Just by looking at him, Mike realized that Hiroshi understood nothing. He then decided to give Hiroshi a piece of advice, telling him to look inside himself and change his pants. The phrase, which should have sounded inspiring, only increased Hiroshi's anger and frustration. Obviously, Mike meant that he should mature and not be so affected by simple things. But unfortunately, Hiroshi was not able to understand that. In the present, Hiroshi awoke after yet another poorly slept night, still convinced he would never touch that game again. During breakfast, Keed complained that he made too much noise playing late into the night, disturbing the family's sleep, but Hiroshi retorted, saying that she also bothered everyone when she brought her friends over, and soon both began to argue. Their mother intervened to end the fight, and Keed, outraged, ended up saying that games were ruining her brother. Trying to recover a bit of his dignity, Hiroshi announced that he had already given up playing, which surprised his sister, but that surprise quickly turned into disappointment. She said that he must have quit because he was weak. She criticized him, saying it was always the same thing. He started something and gave up halfway. He had done it with athletics, now with games, and that was why to her he was pathetic. Keed left the house crying, and their mother tried to console Hiroshi, saying that deep down his sister only wanted him to return to being the amazing boy he once was, the one who had always made the whole family proud, and whom Keed herself boasted about in front of her friends. After that, Hiroshi went to school as usual. On the way, he was once again confronted by two street delinquents. who demanded money in exchange for protection. Too tired to resist, Hiroshi silently handed over his money. In fact, he encountered Mori, but he did not even pay attention to his friend. At the end of the day, he was called by the teacher to talk about his future. As always, he did not know what to answer and asked for a little more time to give a response. Once again, Hiroshi remained lost, unable to find a direction in real life or in the virtual world. Upon leaving home, Hiroshi received a call from Riona. She had tried to contact him several times and asked him to meet her at the game store. Coincidentally, he already planned to go there, determined to sell the quest game once and for all. Arriving at the store, Hiroshi went straight to the point. He wanted to return the game. Riona tried to change the subject, but he did not back down. Irritated, he said that all the game had brought him was pure suffering, killing Martin, becoming a criminal, being imprisoned and tortured to death. None of it had been fun for him. Riona's response was loud laughter, as if she was enjoying herself at his expense, and that only made Hiroshi even more furious. He then said that if she did not buy the game back, he would sell it elsewhere. But Riona warned him, saying that selling the game would solve nothing. If he really wanted to recover his money, he would need to pay attention to what she had to show. It was then that she mentioned the name of the player called Kamui, the same one Jinj had spoken of. Riona explained that Kamui was not only the only one to finish Kill One Question, but also the youngest member of the Tokyo City Council. In a recorded interview, Kamui declared that the game had transformed his life, completely shaping his determination. Riona wanted Hiroshi to follow the same path and defeat the game, and to help him, she showed a guide written by Kamui himself in his youth. Curious, Hiroshi began reading, but soon discovered that the guide was full of arrogance and insult. Already in the opening lines, Kamui called him pathetic for relying on tips. Gritting his teeth, Hiroshi continued, and the first advice for beginners was, train your body in real-life push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and 10 kilometers of running per day, until you completely lose all your hair. Hiroshi snorted, finding that ridiculous, and skipped to the more useful part. He found the section "My childhood friend wants to kill me," and Kamui's advice was cruel, saying that anyone who falls into this game route must die 4 times and accept their own stupidity. Still, he left a hint. If he cannot win a fight, he should win without fighting, by finding the weakness of the guide through exploration. In the following section, for those haunted by the ghost of their best friend, Kamui simply recommended letting the spirit follow behind as if it were something normal. Further ahead, he described hidden weapons and mentioned a secret sword right in the initial room. He also suggested buying extra items whenever possible. But as expected, he always ended his guide by insulting the reader's entire family line. Fed up, Hiroshi closed the guide, and before he could complain further, he felt Riona wrapping herself around him from behind, and soon after she whispered in his ear, saying that if anyone other than Kamui managed to beat this game, she would certainly marry that person. Not only marry, but she intended to do much more for that person, and this left even Hiroshi, already used to her provocations, without words. He tried to push her away, but seeing the hopeful look in her eyes, he ended up giving in, and thus, against his own common sense, he promised to continue. Back in Kilimiquest, he returned exactly to the point where he had stopped. A soldier urged him forward, poking him with a sword to make him move. Mizuriza, still excited from the last interrogation, asked if they could meet again. Hiroshi refused immediately, but then she confessed that she wanted to keep the blanket he had wet, to preserve its scent. Pretending not to hear, Hiroshi was led through an underground tunnel. At the end, the gates of a palace opened, and the soldier explained that this was the castle of the queen, sovereign of the isolated city. But at that moment, the one who had guaranteed Hiroshi's release was the commander of the royal guard, Captain Tesla. Inside the hall, Tesla received Hiroshi courteously, even pulling out a chair for him, although he wrinkled his nose slightly when noticing a faint smell of urine lingering. Tesla then revealed the results of his investigation. Alice had claimed that her brother had been killed by a fruit knife, yet the weapon found could only be wielded by someone stronger, a true swordsman, and logically, Martin's death could not have been intentional. Tesla concluded that it had all been an accident. Therefore, Hiroshi was innocent. For the first time since entering that world, Hiroshi had the feeling of finding someone sensible. Moved, he accepted Tesla's invitation to share a meal. The commander also warned Hiroshi to be careful with Alice, because even after the investigation proved Martin's death was an accident, she still would not forgive him so easily. Even so, Tesla offered him support, saying that Hiroshi could call on him anytime if he needed help. Very grateful, Hiroshi thanked him countless times, for now he was finally free after so long living as a fugitive. His first objective was simple: return home and recover his sword. But there was a problem: his village was located on the outskirts of the city, and the trip would be long. Riona explained the entire route, but warned that even if he was acquitted, the villagers would not accept the truth. The distrust was so great that as soon as they saw him, they would start throwing stones, for they had spent the entire morning collecting stones to hurl at a criminal. And even though he was now declared innocent, nothing guaranteed they would not throw them at him anyway. And that was exactly what happened. When the stones ran out, they grabbed scythes and hammers and chased after him as if he were a brutal criminal. Running, Hiroshi heard Riona remark that this was very similar to real life. Even when the truth comes out, people only believe what they want to believe. To continue the journey, Hiroshi would have to cross a bridge, but it was under watch. Riona suggested they use the time to buy items, since they would soon face Alice. The problem was that Hiroshi only had a few coins, insufficient even for the simplest equipment. He asked how he was supposed to earn money inside the game, and Riona answered bluntly, everything must be done as in real life by working, borrowing, or, in the worst of choices, by stealing from someone. She commented on an elderly couple, saying they would be easy to rob. Hiroshi refused immediately, not wanting to return to prison, and decided to work instead. Riona took him to an employment office, a rundown place that only offered illegal jobs. There, an older woman coldly received him, asking what a murderer was doing there. Even as he tried to explain, no one believed in his innocence. The boss offered him a job in the mines. In that job, he would receive 20,000 coins per month. It was a good amount, but Hiroshi only needed quick money to buy some smoke bombs, and each one cost just 200 coins, so he asked for a job that would give him that amount. The woman then said there was a vacancy that paid 100 coins an hour. The job was simple, but it had one particular detail. It involved a masochistic spell. The work consisted of whipping a man with a whip, following his instructions. Horrified, Hiroshi refused. The woman lost her patience and said that many would do anything for work, and he was being far too picky. Furious, she kicked him out. Riona was a little disappointed because Hiroshi didn't want to steal, couldn't manage to work, and now only one alternative remained: borrowing money. To do so, they needed to look for another player. Fate led them once again to Jinji's son, and since he was also a player, Jinj could see Riona. The two greeted each other casually. Hiroshi, however, still held resentment for the betrayal. Jinj, on the other hand, mocked him, saying Hiroshi should thank him, because if not for him, Hiroshi would never have been acquitted. That left Hiroshi furious, but Riona tried to calm the situation. She asked Jinj to lend the boy some money, but he refused, telling Hiroshi to leave before he wet himself in the place again. At the edge of his patience, Hiroshi lunged, grabbed Jinj, and threw him to the ground, ready to punch him. But Jinj proved more experienced, reversed the position, and threw an English-style punch at him. Hiroshi managed to dodge quickly, yanking his rival's hair. The fight continued until Hiroshi, using all his strength, managed to pin Jinj down. Yet just as he was about to strike him, Martin's ghost appeared once more, coughing blood and screaming that he was about to commit another murder. Terrified, Hiroshi threw himself into a corner, pointing at the void. To his surprise, Jinj didn't take advantage of it. Instead, he confessed that he too was haunted by the ghosts of his dead friends. Sometimes they appeared for just a few seconds, other times they stayed by his side for hours. Riona realized Jinj remained stuck in the game because he couldn't overcome the weight of guilt. For the first time, Hiroshi understood another person's pain. He approached and apologized for losing control. Jinj only laughed, saying he no longer cared. For the first time, the two were on the same side. After that, Jinj gave him a cord and lent him some money. Shortly afterward, outside, Riona asked how he felt after defeating a stronger opponent. Hiroshi didn't even have time to respond before his title changed once again. Now he was the infamous guy who killed his own friend, runs fast, wets himself, and even robs old ladies. Swallowing his frustration, Hiroshi and Riona went to buy smoke bombs. The shopkeeper, Melissa, attended them, and with the 600 coins borrowed, Hiroshi intended to buy 2 bombs and save 200 for emergencies. But since his reputation was still terrible, Melissa charged him double. With no way out, Hiroshi was forced to pay 600 coins for just 2 bombs. He realized that, except for Tesla, all the NPCs seemed to be complete trash. After days of walking, he finally returned to the village where it had all begun. The silence was heavy, and Martin's blood still stained the ground, as if it had been spilled that very day. In the corner still rested the sword he had come to retrieve. As he reached out to grab it, a shadow-moved Alicia emerged from the darkness. She knew he would return for that weapon and had been waiting for him. Panicked, Hiroshi tried to use a smoke bomb, but he didn't even have a lighter to ignite it. Riona reminded him that he should have bought one, but now it was too late. Alicia charged forward with her fruit knife, ready to kill. Suddenly, the window exploded, and someone jumped in. Hiroshi thought it might be Tesla, but no, it was Ms. Arisa, the torturer who now called him, "my little piss boy." Ms. Arisa, whom I'll simply call Risa, declared that since Alicia was ignoring Tesla's decision, that act counted as deliberate aggression, and if she insisted, she would be arrested. Hiroshi asked how she had discovered where he was, and Risa smiled, replying that she had tracked him by his smell of urine. Shocked, he realized he was still reeking of urine since the torture session. Riona explained that since he had never changed clothes in the game, the stench still clung to him. The two clashed in a fierce battle, and although Risa was strong, Alicia was faster, dodging with agility and keeping the torturer on the defensive. At a critical moment, Risa evaded the strikes and knocked Alicia's two knives away, preparing for a decisive attack. But then Alicia laughed, saying her enemy was strong but not as fast as she was. With a precise kick to the stomach followed by another blow, she left the redhead unconscious. Alicia turned her attention to Hiroshi. This time nothing would stop her. But at that moment Martin's spirit appeared once again, not to help, but to scream at his sister to kill Hiroshi at once. Riona tried to intervene, but Alicia, having learned from the previous encounter, now wore protective goggles to avoid blinding tricks. Desperate, Hiroshi tried to recall Kamui's guide. If he couldn't win, he needed to find his friend's weakness. He thought of the cliché of aiming at the girl's heart, so he threw himself in front of her. But Alicia didn't fall for the trap. On the contrary, she reacted with a brutal kick to his groin, leaving him on his knees, her blade about to slice his neck. At that instant, Hiroshi had an unexpected idea. He knew Alicia hated him, but in some twisted way, she still had feelings for him. Looking into her eyes, he confessed his feelings, saying he liked her very much. The girl froze for an instant, failing to strike. Realizing it had worked, Hiroshi kept going, pouring out sweet words and cheesy compliments. His only weapon at that moment was flirting with the assassin who wanted him dead. Even after Hiroshi's confession, Alicia couldn't accept it. Her face was covered in tears, her voice trembling with resentment. To her, Hiroshi could say it had all been an accident, but her brother was still dead. He had died because of Hiroshi, all because he wanted to flee that city. She took a deep breath, almost losing herself, and admitted that she too liked him very much, but now nothing could ever be the same. Heartbroken, Alicia turned her back and ran away, as if fleeing from reality. Thus Hiroshi survived, but his words had struck harder than any blow. For the first time, he realized how foolish he had been. To him, it was just a game, but to Alicia, Martin, and all the others, he had been a real childhood friend. His greatest sin wasn't only killing Martin, but fleeing instead of trying to save him. While he reflected, Ms. Arisa woke from unconsciousness. Hiroshi thanked her for her help, but she only smiled and asked for one of his fingers in return. Horrified, Hiroshi instantly stopped feeling grateful and kicked her out. He picked up his rusty sword, took a deep breath, and told Riona to wait for him. Then he went alone to the great tree on the outskirts of the village, remembering Martin's words about a promise. There, before the ancient trunk, Martin's spirit appeared again. He asked Hiroshi if he was ready to die, but this time Hiroshi only smiled, saying he couldn't die yet, because he still had things left to say. He recalled Kamui's advice: if he couldn't drive the ghost away, he had to accept it. With that, Hiroshi extended his hand, telling Martin they could live a new adventure together. The two shook hands, and suddenly Hiroshi was transported into a memory of the past. He saw himself alongside Martin and Alicia, the three inseparable back then. And then he remembered their childhood promise, the vow to be friends forever. Back in the present, Martin's spirit was no longer hostile. He thanked Hiroshi for remembering the promise and said he could now rest in peace. After smiling, he disappeared. Hiroshi felt his chest tighten. It was just a game, yet there was still emotion in saying goodbye to a friend. Riona, who had followed him, saw everything and tried to console him, saying that only Alicia remained now, but they could resolve that little by little. First, she said, they should fix that rusty sword and buy him new pants, because she couldn't stand the smell of his urine anymore. As they walked, the system updated his title once again. Now Hiroshi was officially the murderer of his best friend, the fast runner, the pisser, and the thief of old ladies. Before he could complain again, the sound of a bell echoed through the city, the air filled with smoke, and Hiroshi ran to the gates and saw chaos. The city was in flames, with villagers screaming and running in every direction. Everyone was desperate, and no one stopped to explain anything. They only fled in whatever way they could. Riona remarked on how realistic this game truly is. People here only care about themselves, and in a dangerous situation, no one has time to provide information. She then suggested that they should ask the blacksmith what was happening while he repaired her sword. That was how Hiroshi discovered the truth. The city was under attack by goblins. Confused, he asked whether there was not a huge moat protecting the city. The blacksmith wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at him as if he were an idiot. Immediately afterwards, he asked Hiroshi if he truly believed that a simple ditch would stop the goblins. To make everything worse, a drought that has lasted for 500 years had completely dried up the moat. The goblins took advantage of that moment to attack. Hiroshi saw in this the chance to prove his worth. He asked the blacksmith to fix his sword, but the man was already gathering his belongings to flee. He told Hiroshi that if he was so eager to fight, then he should sharpen his own sword. With no choice left, Hiroshi began to work on the rusty blade. Outside, the screams of despair only increased. He complained that it was taking too long, and Riona then said that even rusty, his sword could still be lethal against monsters. Convinced, Hiroshi tried to fight, but was stopped. Riona told him that he did not have the strength to face goblins, and that his chance of dying was 120%. Hiroshi's heart froze. He then asked if death in this game meant death in real life, but Riona shook her head, saying that no, it did not, but his console would be destroyed, and he would be permanently banned from the game. She said this was no lie, because there had already been cases of players losing their consoles and suing the company, but everything had been silenced with money and influence. This game was such garbage that it was forgotten shortly after its release, and it was in that moment that Hiroshi realized that even his own guide no longer believed in the game. Riona suggested that he simply leave the game and return to seek Kamui's advice in the real world. But before logging out, Hiroshi asked to see the goblins just once. She did not want to allow it, but in the end agreed, warning him to remain silent. Hiroshi opened a crack in the door and peeked. That was how he saw something that left him in shock. Creatures of incredibly fast movements, savage and cruel. They are not like game monsters. They are predators of flesh and blood. Ready to leave the game, Hiroshi was already stepping back when he heard a scream. A child had been surrounded by a goblin. Without thinking, he threw himself outside. But Riona pulled him back. She began to ask if he was insane, because a new console costs 120,000 yen. However, for him, she could make a special discount of 126,000 yen. Hiroshi was left speechless, for after all, how could a discount be more expensive than the original price of 90,000 yen? He asked if she was insane, but Riona went on insisting that he give up, because that girl was just an NPC and not a real being. Hiroshi, however, thought of Martin, and to him it did not matter if it was an NPC or not. A life was still a life. He did not want to watch someone die before his eyes again. While they argued, 3 soldiers appeared to protect the child. It was 3 against only 1 goblin. It should have been easy, but within seconds the scene turned into a massacre. The monster advanced with its absurd speed and tore off the arm of 1 soldier with a single bite. The other 2 reacted together, but the goblin vanished from their sight, and in the blink of an eye appeared behind one of them, ripping him apart into pieces. The last one tried to resist, but had both arms ripped away before being brutally finished off. Seeing this, Hiroshi was paralyzed, and Riona then explained coldly, saying that this is the reason why all beginners receive the same order: leave the city before encountering goblins, because if they meet them, they will not survive. Shocked by the brutality of the goblins, Hiroshi asked if there was no one capable of facing them. Riona explained that only 2 players had managed to do so: Kamui, the legendary adventurer, and another man who was a boxing champion of the East and the Pacific in real life. In an interview, when asked what had been his most difficult opponent, his answer was short and cruel. For him, the hardest opponent was a goblin. Even knowing he had no chance, Hiroshi could not ignore the child's crying. He decided to save him. Riona, tired of his stubbornness, only said that if he ruined his console, she might even give him a discount for a new one, but before playing the hero, he should at least change his pants. She pointed to the blacksmith's trousers there in the corner. They were dirty, but they would still be better than saving someone while smelling of urine. After changing clothes, Hiroshi prepared himself to depart. Riona promised to lure out the goblin, and at the right moment he ran to grab the girl, But there was not only one monster, in fact there were two. Even so, Hiroshi did not back down. He ordered the girl to run in another direction while he tried to block the two monsters. They chased her, and without thinking Hiroshi activated his acceleration ability, reaching them in the blink of an eye and saving the child. But running was not enough. He knew that sooner or later he would have to face the goblin. It was then that Tesla appeared, dressed in completely golden armor. He advanced with his shining sword and with a single slash managed to defeat both monsters. Right after that, soldiers appeared to escort the girl to safety. For the first time, Hiroshi felt like a true hero, and his title was instantly updated. Now he was the killer of the best friend, the urinator, the thief of old ladies, and finally the greatest lolicon of all time. Nothing could be more humiliating to him. Even so, Tesla approached, and having witnessed his courage, he extended an invitation, telling him to become a mercenary that protected the city. Hiroshi accepted immediately. After all, fighting at Tesla's side meant that if anything went wrong, the commander would be there to protect him. Tesla then said that he should go to the real event field so that he could receive more instructions on how to fight. And after accepting everything, Hiroshi saved his progress and left the game. This time he was satisfied, because he felt that he had made some real progress. The next day he told Mori about these events, and Mori was glad to see him excited. Mori even commented that Hiroshi seemed to be changing, becoming more and more determined. At night, before logging in again, Hiroshi decided to watch another part of Kamui's guide. Kamui explained that there were two ways to leave the starting city. The first would be to raise reputation with side quests and main quests until receiving an official exit pass. The second would be to escape through the back gate, facing the goblins that were about to attack it. The third option would be to hide for 4 days until the attack ended and then leave pretending that none of it had ever happened. Finally, there was a fourth option, to join Tesla's royal guard. But Kamui warned, saying that only an idiot would choose to fight at his side. The training is unbearable, and the mortality rate reaches 300%. Even so, he left one note: if the player already had the title of greatest killer of the best friend, there was a small chance of survival. Kamui then congratulated Hiroshi for having overcome the curse of the ghost and the persecution of the childhood friend, but warned him that now his chances of survival were only 0.5%. The instructions to survive were clear. He must endure the first 5 training sessions, survive the second goblin attack, and if he managed to do that, some important secrets would be revealed. Kamui said nothing more, and the rest would depend only on Hiroshi's strength. Determined not to spend money on another console, Hiroshi swore he would win. The following morning, he reconciled with his sister and apologized for the argument. He said that he would finish the game once and for all, and that in the coming days he might make some noise playing at night, so he hoped she would understand. This time Hiroshi promised himself that he would not run away, avoiding repeating the same episode in the track and field club. By accepting Tesla's proposal, he was taken to the Queen's castle, the sovereign of the city where he was. As soon as Hiroshi greeted her, he was graced with a warm embrace and filled with a good emotion within that game. Hiroshi even let out a moan of happiness. Soon after, Tesla led him to the training grounds, where he introduced him to 2 novices. Their mission was clear: to defend the castle against the goblins. After the explanation, Tesla withdrew, leaving Soldier Bob responsible for guiding Hiroshi to his quarters. Riona, who had remained silent, advised him to pay attention to Bob's words, because he might reveal useful information. Hiroshi received a private room, and after changing clothes, he was taken by Bob to the training field. The soldier encouraged him, saying that the training was not so hard, but upon evaluating Hiroshi's thin body, he commented that Hiroshi seemed more suitable for intelligence work than for combat. Nevertheless, Hiroshi immediately refused, unwilling to admit his weakness. At the field, he discovered that the instructor was the same soldier who had arrested him earlier. As he already disliked him, the man took the chance to impose training much harsher on Hiroshi than on the other recruit. Later, Kat appeared, the soldier who had escorted the girl saved by Hiroshi. She praised his courage, but the conversation was interrupted by the instructor. He was called for a training duel, and with no experience whatsoever, Hiroshi was beaten in a humiliating way. He fell to the ground, unable to react. The soldier laughed in his face and called him slower than a snail. Then another person stepped into the fight, defeated the instructor, and restored the honor of the recruits. But from that moment on, Hiroshi was completely ignored. Neither Kat, nor Bob, nor the other soldiers gave him any attention. He had become invisible, exhausted. Hiroshi returned to his bed and told himself that he only needed to endure 4 more days. And then he collapsed from fatigue. On the second day, he discovered that the sleep system of the game imitated real life. He woke up exhausted with a heavy body, and Riona explained that he had slept too much. In a panic, Hiroshi ran to join the others, but no one cared about his presence. All tension was focused on Nada, who was already standing out as the true leader among the novices. The soldier Amos ordered Hiroshi to start training sword swings. Meanwhile, 2 men approached, reminding Hiroshi of his reputation as the killer of the childhood friend, and no matter what was said, they did not believe he was innocent. Nada also warned him, telling him not to cause trouble, and the tension was only broken when Kat intervened, cutting the conversation. Thanks to her, Hiroshi was able to continue training, and under her guidance he even learned some moves. But on the 3rd day he was placed face to face with Nada in a duel, and a single blow was enough to bring him down. Nada and his friend mocked Hiroshi a lot, since he could barely lift his head. Both in the game and in real life, he felt more useless than ever. He sat alone in a corner, completely defeated. Riona tried to console him, telling him to endure a little longer, and to distract him, she led him to a newly discovered counseling room. Hiroshi entered thinking that there he could relieve his stress. There he spoke about the isolation, the taunts, and even the reflections he had endured. The counselor listened carefully, and without hesitation replied, saying that the problem was not the others, the problem was him. He had no skill at all, and yet chose to become a soldier. And if he was suffering all of this, the blame was his alone. The words hurt more than any blow he had ever suffered. Hiroshi left that place even angrier, and Riona could only say that in real life things were the same. Many offices only repeat things that do not help at all. For Hiroshi, that was the last straw. What should have been advice only left him even more irritated. Hiroshi could not understand why Riona had taken him to so many useless places. It was then that Katie approached, and seeing his accumulated frustration, she suggested that he try praying, because maybe that would relieve a little of the pressure. Following the advice, Hiroshi and Riona went to the church. And after hearing his confession, the nun declared that he was cursed and began a purification ritual. Hiroshi imagined something solemn and profound, but all he received was a bucket of cold water dumped over his head. That was enough to be purified. To him that was ridiculous, but there was nothing he could do. On the 4th day, everything returned to normal. Hiroshi was beaten once again. After training, Nada and the man called Balo cornered him to extort money. When he said he had none, the 2 threw him to the ground and beat him. Katie tried to call someone to intervene, but the soldier pretended not to see anything. By this point, Hiroshi's situation was so miserable that even Riona was laughing at him, and that only increased his anger. And when he argued with her out loud, Katie saw him alone, and then the 2 men began to intimidate her, saying that if she kept staying close to Hiroshi, she would be treated the same way. Frightened, Katie stepped back, saying that she did not even know him. Thus, Hiroshi's life continued, being rejected, suffering abuse in the game and in real life. To him, it seemed there was no way out, and even Riona was laughing along with the others. But perhaps out of pity, she promised to help him. On the 5th and final day, at dawn, a scandal broke out. Nada's boots made by his mother had disappeared, and to make things worse, his sword was found stuck inside a toilet. And since only Hiroshi had reasons for revenge, he was the first suspect. Bob intervened, saying that there was no evidence. Yet everyone looked at Hiroshi with suspicion. At that moment, everyone heard a scream. They all ran to the dormitory and found the cook in despair. It turned out her underwear had been stolen, and it was hidden inside Nada's bag. The hero of the troop, in seconds, became a despised pervert, and even Balo, his closest ally, fought against him. The news spread quickly, and Nada was expelled from the army. But the story did not end there. Tesla appeared with a letter accusing Amos of having plotted the whole affair, stealing the shoes, sabotaging the sword, and pinning the blame on soldier Nada. The letter was signed by Balo. The soldiers began to argue, and Tesla asked the group to confirm the truth. Kat was the first to speak, then the others said everything they knew, and thus Amos was removed from his post. That was when Hiroshi discovered the truth. All that chaos had been created by Riona, and since she was effectively invisible, there was no evidence to incriminate her. He was very grateful, but did not fail to say that she had gone too far, making an old man cry like that. Now the decisive day approached. The goblin attack was about to happen. Hiroshi was still not prepared, but when Riona asked if he would give up, he replied firmly that he had come this far, so even if he died, he would at least die having given everything he had. Riona smiled in relief, and then revealed her true motive for making him play that infernal game. 10 years ago, she herself had been a player. At that time, she knew Kamui, and with the naive mentality of a schoolgirl, she fell in love with him. Before Kamui left the city of Teda, she gathered the courage to confess her feelings. But she was rejected for a reason that would make any man explode with indignation. Her breasts were too large and frightened Kamui. It was that absurd rejection that made her desire only one thing: to destroy the game that had ruined her life. Since that absurd rejection by Kamui, which happened 10 years earlier, Ryuna still bore the wound and ripped herself apart. She felt insulted and rejected, not for who she was, but because of the size of her own body. From then on, she decided to find someone capable of beating the Kalami quest and dethroning Kamui, just to see him regret it. Not only that, she planned to marry the victor and flaunt herself before him, rubbing her happiness in his face, all for a childish vengeance. That night, unable to sleep, Hiroshi went out for fresh air and thought about how absurd all his effort was, only to help Ryona fulfill a childish revenge. At that moment, he met Tesla, who was also awake. The commander confessed he could not sleep because he did not know when the goblins would attack, and in conversation he discovered that Hiroshi dreamed of leaving the city. Surprisingly, Tesla replied that he had the same desire. If he were not the captain of the guard, he would already have set off to explore the vast world. He promised that if they survived the battle, he would accompany him. Excited, Hiroshi logged out to look for new tips in Kamui's guide. But as always, the text began with a barrage of insults, calling him incompetent and useless. Only after that did it reveal a special trick for the goblin event, and before he could read more, the site crashed. Back in the game on the 6th day, the moment the goblin attack would begin finally arrived. Ryona was very excited because she believed Hiroshi would truly win this event. She asked whether Hiroshi had eaten well, and if he had already gone to the bathroom, trying to know if he was completely prepared. Next, Tesla gave a morale speech and introduced the new commanders, Amazarisa and Alicia, known respectively as the Masochist Woman and the Infernal Knife. They are feared even among mercenaries. Hiroshi felt a chill down his spine, especially when he crossed eyes with Alicia, his old childhood friend, insisting they overcome their differences. Tesla assigned Hiroshi, Arisa, and Alicia to patrol together around his native village. Hiroshi begged for another assignment, but the commander did not accept it. With no alternative, he went along with the two women, determined to keep his distance from both. The streets were quiet, residents hiding in their homes, until suddenly a thief appeared, pushing Hiroshi aside to snatch a purse. When he tried to pass Alicia, she intercepted him. With a quick motion, she returned the item and cut off the thief's hand, leaving the purse's owner so shocked she fainted. Interrogating the criminal, Arisa discovered he had been incited to steal, believing the city was vulnerable because of the war, and that many other robberies were happening simultaneously. Following the clues, they reached a casino where civilians were being held hostage. The supposed leader was a bald man, but Alicia defeated him easily and realized he was only a pawn. The true mastermind behind everything was Jin. He grabbed Hiroshi by the scruff and tried to use him as a hostage, ordering the girls to drop their weapons and leave, or else he would break the boy's neck. However, Hiroshi was no longer the coward who feared girls, and with a sharp elbow strike he managed to break free. He declared that he would face Jinj alone. The ex-criminal was ready this time with a pair of brass knuckles and accepted his challenge. Before they could trade blows, Alicia intervened with a devastating punch, knocking Jinj down in an instant. Then came the revelation. Jinj actually wanted to be arrested, so he would have free food and, above all, would stay far away from the goblins. Hiroshi called him pathetic. But before being taken away, Jinj paused to reflect on the boy's words. Soon after, Tesla appeared, praising Hiroshi for his deed. Hiroshi tried to credit the victory to the two women, but he had no time to say anything more. An alarm echoed. That sound meant the goblins had begun an attack at the western gate. Everyone ran, but on the way Hiroshi felt a pain in his stomach. Pretending to take a shortcut, he rushed to the bathroom. There he strained until he was finished, then quickly pulled up his pants and got ready to leave. It was then that he noticed something. A goblin had been watching him the whole time. Hidden in the darkness, Hiroshi screamed for Ryona. But in the real world, she only thought he was suffering from hemorrhoids. The monster charged, but before the fatal blow could fall, the goblin's head rolled across the floor. Behind it was Ms. Arisa, who had followed Hiroshi since he ran to the bathroom. After saving Hiroshi there, Ms. Arisa picked up his sword, saying she wanted to inspect it. Without warning, she stabbed the blade into his leg. and Hiroshi screamed in pain, but that only excited the Inquisitor even more. Taking advantage of the fact that Alicia had not yet returned, the girl leaned close and whispered, telling him to move toward her, because she would make him feel even more pleasure. A pleasure he had never experienced before, but her kind of pleasure was something Hiroshi could never endure. Fortunately, before it was too late, Alicia entered the place, and the two began to argue. Hiroshi used the distraction to escape, limping back to Riona. The stress brought back his stomach pain, reminding him of the track days when he had wet himself in front of everyone. But this time he did not want to give up. He took a deep breath, held himself steady, and when the pain passed, Riona told him to head to the northern gate, because the monsters were already there. He ran, arriving just in time to see Tesla leading the troops against a horde of goblins. The combat was brutal. Tesla crushed dozens of enemies with his aerial techniques. Lisa cut down everything in her path, savoring every second of the carnage. Alicia emerged from the shadows to finish enemies with lethal precision, and of course, dozens of anonymous soldiers existed only to heighten the drama of the scene. When the massacre ended, Kat and Bob appeared with more news. The goblins had broken through the western gate and were advancing toward the Queen's palace. Sensing that the true enemy was there, Tesla ordered the troops to protect the city, while he alone would confront the greatest threat. Against all logic, Hiroshi decided to follow him. Arriving at the palace, they witnessed a hellish vision. A gigantic one-eyed red orc was slaughtering soldiers as if they were rag dolls. Tesla raised his sword, revealing that he had fought such creatures before, and now it would be the final encounter. The clash of blades echoed like thunder, and Hiroshi, watching from afar, trembled with fear. He wanted to help, but his legs refused to move. He only breathed in relief when Lisa and Alicia arrived, telling him to stay out of the way. Lisa was the first to charge, but she was hurled against the wall and fell unconscious. Realizing the monster was both fast and strong, Alicia advanced like lightning, dodging and counterattacking. The battle only ended when soldiers brought a huge cage filled with goblin children. The cries of the little ones distracted the beast, and Tesla seized the moment to drive his blade into the orc's heart, thus conquering victory. Hiroshi froze. That did not match what Kamui had described in his guide. Looking closer, he realized those goblin children had not been captured in the heat of battle, they had been there for a long time. He stared at Tesla and asked what this meant. The commander remained silent, only finishing the orc off, but his gaze was cold. Then the queen appeared, and with her firm voice she revealed the truth. They had captured the goblins on purpose and used their children as bait to provoke constant attacks. In doing so, they united the people through fear and consolidated their power, turning the territory of Titi into an independent land, a closed kingdom free from external nations. Hiroshi's shock was immediate. The commander in whom he had placed so much trust was nothing but a hypocrite. The queen, who should have protected the citizens, had been manipulating them as mere tools. And as if that were not enough, Tesla raised his sword again, looking directly at Hiroshi. He then declared that Hiroshi knew too much. And in that instant Kamui's words returned to his mind, the warning that joining Tesla's guard meant a 300% mortality rate, because right from the start you would be forced to face a high-level boss. Hiroshi's nightmare was only beginning. Tesla did not hesitate, and as soon as he declared Hiroshi a burden who knew too much, he unleashed his final strike to kill him with a single blow. Terrified, Hiroshi closed his eyes and prayed only for a quick, painless death, but the blade never struck him. When he opened his eyes, he saw Alicia standing before him, blocking the attack with her own body. Stunned, Hiroshi asked why. With trembling lips and a weak voice, Alicia explained she had seen Martin in a dream. Martin himself had asked her to forgive him, so she accepted and forgave. Since then, she had been secretly protecting Hiroshi. She told him she was truly happy that he had confessed his feelings, and that her dream now was for him to live for her and for her brother. With a final smile, she collapsed lifeless into Hiroshi's arms. Desperate, he asked Riona if there was any way to revive NPCs, but the answer was cold and final. No, there was no way. Until then, Hiroshi had always endured being the weak one, both in real life and in the game. But losing Alicia went too far. Something inside him broke, and when Tesla attacked again, Hiroshi no longer ran. He dodged and counterattacked, using every trick Kamui had described. Kamui had taught that in these games, a player's attributes could rise in proportion to their emotions, but only to positive ones, such as unshakable belief, genuine passion, or naive courage. If he could awaken that from his soul, he could change his destiny. This was not just a game mechanic, it was reality itself. Taken by a newfound strength, Hiroshi charged against Tesla. His strikes came like a storm, forcing the commander to retreat. Tesla could only defend non-stop. In an instant, Hiroshi disarmed him and went for the finishing blow, but his beginner's blade could not pierce the elite armor of his enemy. Exhausted, Hiroshi smiled bitterly, since this game was so realistic and his weapon could not wound. Then the most he could do was accept his end. Tesla lifted his other sword, ready to execute him. At that moment, Hiroshi encountered Martin once more. In a vision between life and death, crying, he apologized for not being able to protect Alicia. But Martin only smiled, reminding him of their promise that they would always be friends. And now, it was time for him to truly fight. Back in the battle, Hiroshi's broken sword glowed with a dark aura, transforming into a demonic blade. He and Tesla assumed their final stances. The commander gathered his full presence, rushing forward like lightning. Hiroshi, now calm, prepared for the decisive clash. And then the unthinkable happened. The queen suddenly appeared, shoving Hiroshi aside, and so Tesla's blade pierced the queen's own stomach. That was the end of the game. Hiroshi woke up in the real world, only to see his console engulfed in flames. The next day, depressed over such an absurd death, he met Hyuna at the game store. To his surprise, she tried to console him, admitting that even she had not expected such an ending. Tesla then asked if he wanted to try playing again, saying he could lend him a console. Hiroshi replied that he wanted to think about it. At home, he opened Kamui's guide intending to close it for good, but instead he found a new entry: "You died and lost your console." Kamui wrote that this game was just like reality, and that all Hiroshi needed was to believe in himself. In that guide, Kamui instructed him to obtain another console, insert the burned disc, and type a code 10 times. If he were lucky, he would return to the game 1 hour before his death. Hiroshi's hope to save Alicia came back. He was now completely determined to re-enter the game, but before doing so, he felt he needed to prepare. In the following days, he trained without rest. His family began to look at him differently. His teacher, even without hearing an answer about his future, noticed a change in his eyes. Even the 2 delinquents who used to extort him fled when Hiroshi stared at them without fear. 1 month later, he was finally ready. He returned to the game, carrying not only his sword, but also the determination to save everyone. And that is how this anime concludes, the anime where the failed hero, for the very first time, decided to believe in himself.